Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And before we start, I'm going to try and remember to say this on every episode. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscriber button, as they all say in the US. Today, I have Angelo on the other end of the line with me. He's Steve D'Angelo's younger brother, but he's also equally involved and has been for a long time in the world of cannabis and hemp. And he's just worked and produced a documentary that is, I can't remember, I'll ask him in a second, either has just been shown on PBS or is going to be. So I thought we should have a chat. So Steve doesn't get all the airtime, and we can get those younger siblings in. Andrew, welcome to the Koala podcast. As I like to say, up the tree with the koalas. Thanks for joining us. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning, but when we know Steve's history in terms of how he got involved in cannabis. Did you around the same sort of age, but 10 years younger, do the same sort of thing? And I'm really interested, did your parents sort of go, another one?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the program. I'm thrilled to be here. My story is a little bit different than Steve. I did experience cannabis in high school. I was a jock when I grew up. So Steve's 10 years older than me. And he left home at a pretty young age, 13, 14, 15 years old, as you guys have already talked about. And I'm a little kid, right? I'm still in my mother's arms. And, our family got broken up by death and divorce and all kinds of dark, traumatic things. And so I decided to be a jock. I had a little bit of athletic ability, and it was a good way to sort of escape all that and try to, hitting a ball really hard is a great way to get some aggression out. But I got hurt in high school. I had a dream. We D'Angelos, we dream big and we go for it hard. And I was trying to be a professional athlete, man. And then I got hurt in high school, and my dream was over, and I was miserable. I was in physical pain. And we used to have Sunday suppers at my mom's house, every once in a while. The brothers would come together at my mom's house. When you're in a divorced family, and there's a big age difference between siblings, you sometimes don't see each other that much. And so my mom was very good about making sure that we'd have these family dinners and bring everybody together. And I was over there miserable in pain and sitting in her kitchen. My brother was smoking a joint, as he often did in those settings. And from the time I was 10 years old, every time he had a joint in the kitchen at my mom's house, he'd offer it to me. And as an athlete, I always said, no, none of that. But I was hurt, and I didn't know, and I was miserable, and there's a little voice inside my head. At this time, I'm 16. And there's just this little voice in my head that said, you really need to take that joint this time, Andrew. And so I did, and it changed my life. As your listeners, many of you probably have had similar experiences where that first psychoactive medicine hitting those receptors just not only did my physical pain ease, but my emotional and spiritual pain was absolutely transformed by the medicine. And I realized, one, my life wasn't over just because I was hurt and I wasn't going to be, a professional athlete. and two, there was a hell of a lot more in the world than sports.
Well,
um,
that I
and
knew without having to take marijuana, or sorry, cannabis, I should say, because I hate the word
Good for
marijuana.
you,
Uh,
man.
Day one, well, I went to an English boarding school, so they drove it out of me very quickly. By the age of 12, I really had no desire ever to go on a sports field ever again. I had to do it till I was 18, but it was miserable, I have to say.
yeah, no, yes, those containers can be very brutally beyond competitive and cause trauma for people. But
I mean, I won't
you
even
know,
I won't even enter a gym. Just the smell of gyms just sends me. I can't do it. So everybody thought
yeah,
that
no, well, it's
for
a
me, they're like a
shame.
medieval torture chamber.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. I'm blessed. I still have a positive relationship with exercise and sports. But I don't play competitive sports anymore. That all went away because the cannabis mission hit me literally, Sean, halfway through that first joint, and my mother was a little, her reaction, as you alluded to, was not great, that her younger son was now smoking weed with the older her, and she was like, "Get out of the kitchen if you're going to do that." And my brother was very defensive, of course. "Okay, Ma, we'll leave." And she was like, "No, just go upstairs. Don't be so dramatic, Stephen."
Mothers are
Um,
great,
uh,
aren't
and so we went upstairs and we just smoked joint after joint after joint until dinner was ready. And I got, very stoned, I guess you could say. But it was a spiritual moment for me. It wasn't just getting high or stoned. It was getting well. And my mind just blew open. And my brother, I remember my brother was looking at me and he was saying, "Oh my God, bro. I can't believe it. Thank God this is happening right now. I thought we lost you." He thought I was going to turn out to be like my dad, who was kind of a jock, straight kind of, fellow. And so he was very worried about that. And he's like, I'm so thankful. I'm so glad that you're smoking with me right now. And I was saying, I'm so glad that this is making me feel better. And our relationship really took off at that moment because the age difference, the divorce, my brother leaving home. My brother also provided for my mom and I's household. My parents would fight and my dad would cut my mom off and there'd be no money. And Steve would give my mom money. I didn't realize this till I was older. Of course, they keep these things from you when you're a child, but um, and that was a big thing for Steve to do, and quite a burden for a teenager himself at that time, um, and it's one reason because our other brother died when I was pre-verbal infant. Steve was 11 or 12 years old, and because of that, and Steve's leadership really in helping provide for our household, this is something that a child can pick up intuitively,
Yeah.
that this is happening, that my brother is helping. And it really created a loyalty in my heart for my brother, and a desire to be with him, and to walk shoulder to shoulder with him on the cannabis trail, because the medicine had such an impact on me. I wanted other people to have that experience.
So
I
as a
wanted,
later teen, were you already, what were you doing? I mean, did you stay and go to college? Did you work?
yeah,
Or,
no, what I was doing was, and I was a jock in high school, but in high school I took a theater class, because I had this, my father wanted me to grow up and be a lawyer, and so I was taking a theater class to learn how to be a good litigator. And I got bit by the bug when the joint when cannabis came into my life, I was taking this class. They both happened at the same time. I got bit by the cannabis bug, and I got bit by the theater or acting performer bug at the same time. So and as you can imagine, I had to find myself, as a young man. We all do, uh, kids, not just men, of course. But we have to find ourselves at that stage of life. And I had this passion for theater. So I came to California, we were growing up in Washington, D.C. I came to California. I sort of had at that point, an intuitive vision. When I came to California and visited the school I went to called Chapman University, I just had this intuitive feeling. There was just this feeling in the air in California that we did not have where I grew up, with that anything is possible here.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
it still has that feeling, but just in a slightly more weird sense, I think.
Yeah, the country's changed, California's changed, everything's changed a lot since the 1980s when I went to college. But yes, people still migrate to the Bay Area in particular, but Los Angeles and California to make their dreams come true.
Yeah.
It still has that quality and brings people and more importantly, there was more freedom with cannabis hemp in California, even in the 1980s, than there was where I grew up.
Well,
It was
look, I
still,
remember the same thing because the first time I visited the US, I was at college in the UK, and we came over for a summer and did our Jack Kerouac trip. We thought on buses all the way from New York to, and when we arrived in California, even as young Englishmen, we were on the bus coming through the desert, and there was this, you just had this feeling. It was, yeah. And of course, when we arrived, yeah, we were young, so you immediately make friends, and all these other things suddenly appear, and
yeah,
you have a lot of mind expansion very quickly.
right. And, college, there's a certain aspect of what you learn in college is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right?
Well, there
And I
used to be.
enjoy.
I'm not sure there's so much now, but there definitely used to.
Well, everything's changed,
Yeah.
right? And this is pre-digital age we're talking about here. I still wrote my papers on an electric typewriter in my first year in college. The computers came my second year in college, was the first PCs and word processor.
No, well,
All
they
I could
hadn't
do,
they didn't reach us until after I left college, so I was
oh
still.
man, yeah, and so like people should understand the age we're talking about here. People, if you're under the age of 40, you probably can't relate to anything I'm talking about right now. But it was an analog time, and I just loved the theater. I had a great college experience. I sold weed in the dorms. I brought a half pound of weed with me from the East Coast. I was selling weed immediately in high school. Literally the night of that first joint at my mom's, I went to my brother's house. He fronted me some weed, and I started selling weed in high school. And then my high school experience went from miserable to pretty cool because I became instantly, a
A bit more,
popular
yeah,
among
popular and
a
in
little
demand.
more a little more popular and a lot more in demand, especially from the opposite sex, which was a nice thing to experience because I had not experienced that beforehand. And all of a sudden, I started getting these positive reinforcements, however dark that time in prohibition was, and it was scary to even. So I had to sell my weed out in the woods. I wouldn't even bring it into the high school. I would make people meet me out in the woods by this creek that everybody knew, right? And that's where I would do my transactions in high school because it was safe, okay? And even if the kid rolled on me, the cops weren't going to be able to find my stash that I kept out in the woods. So I knew it was safe, and Steve taught me that. Okay, so Steve, Steve is schooling me on how to do all these things, right, and keep myself safe. And we call it the code, and he was teaching me the code, the underground code at that time. How to keep ourselves safe, and two, how to spread the medicine to more people. All we knew at that time was that we just needed to get this in the hands of more people. If we could just do that, the plant was going to do the rest of the work for us. It's smarter than we are, man.
Much smarter and been around a
And
lot longer.
yeah, and so we just knew that intuitively, and then I'm sure it must have been similar in England, in the UK, but in those days, in the 1980s, it was a very dark time. It was a very dangerous time to be working with the plant. But when you did a transaction with somebody, or you smoked a joint for the first time with
It was total
somebody,
trust. Whoever we dealt with,
total trust, man.
it's total trust because and in the UK at that time, what was even more interesting, especially in the early 80s, is that psychedelics were really they'd gone out of fashion. So if you used them, the trust was, absolutely beyond trust. It was really,
Yeah,
really interesting period of time. And of course,
yeah.
we had Thatcher, we had, all these sort of change, but in that, I don't I think most of us really didn't, we've got a great drinking culture and we did drink a bit, but we couldn't afford it. It was much cheaper to buy our hashish, Lebanese hashish, and our psychedelics. And once you had that network, it was really easy to. I have to say, we don't actually, I don't remember that much fear about it. It's just like, you know what? It's normal for us, so we don't care and we didn't, I suppose we didn't worry about the police too much. I mean, you're wary, but we just got on with it, I think.
Well, that's good. I mean, in the United States, the cops got a huge amount of funding from Reagan, and the DEA got a huge amount of funding, kind of like ICE is today. The DEA was doing exactly to us what ICE is doing to
Yeah, exactly. I
immigrants
mean, look,
and
I think in the UK, I was young, white, and middle class, so I'm fine. But if I was in London, Manchester, Leeds, and young from a West Indian or a Pakistani background, that's a completely different story.
well, of course, here too, or Steve and
I think
I did.
that's really worth highlighting. It's really important to remember that is, we were lucky because my accent, the way I look, all those sorts of things allowed us to sort of operate. And I didn't live in the city, I lived in the country. So, they
Mm.
just presumed that stuff didn't happen, although it was happening all around them all the time.
Yeah, no, Howard Marks is a
Yeah.
hero of mine. I read about some of his adventures during that time. Fear was one part of the experience. It was also a thrill.
Yeah.
Like you said, when you have that instant trust with people, and they become close friends, and almost family outside of your core family, your blood family. They become family. And my best friends in the world are the guys I met in college, that I went to Grateful Dead shows with, that I experienced psychedelics with, that we did theater together with. They're still my best friends in the whole world. You're absolutely right, and that trust it was, and that was fun. I enjoyed that a lot, that experience of connection that we have as a underground culture at that time was real thrilling for me. And I wanted to do plays that spoke to that culture, and I wanted to use theater and storytelling to change the world and have impact. And in those days, you couldn't just open a cannabis shop. And we had some work to do as activists and advocates, because we didn't particularly like being criminals, and we were good at trading cannabis, and we were, eventually in the story in my we were doing a lot of business at one point. And when you do that much business with that many people, it's hard not to get busted, eventually. And then, you got a situation where you're looking at prison time and all these other things, are horrible. So we were trying to avoid that outcome by being activists at the same time that we were, trading cannabis and all of that sort of thing. So it took us a lot longer to change the laws, Sean, than we thought. When I took that first joint with my brother, I figured, oh yeah, man, we'll work on this for 5 years or so, get it done. This is easy. It's obvious that this is a good plant, not a bad plant. The people are just out of their minds. They've been lied to. We just got to tell the truth and, no problem. We'll have this. And here I am 40 years later. And, we've made huge progress. We have had amazing victories. We have won. It's important to remember that. But there's still so much more work to be done. And in the United States, we still don't have federal legalization. In most countries, you don't have federal legalization. In England, and when I was in Northern Europe the last couple of years, it's just the stigma is just off the hook. Like people are telling me in Sweden that if you smoke weed, the perception of you is that you're going to lose everything you own and end up in the streets and go crazy. And that's what's going to happen to you if you smoke weed. And that's like the mainstream perception that I was told and that I sort of experienced because I was keynoting a conference there, and there was a lot of trepidation. And then the authorities would not allow the conference to repeat in subsequent years, and no venue would rent to the conference.
Yeah, look, those Scandinavian countries are they're pretty weird about weed. I mean, to be honest, in the UK now, it is close to normality. I mean, obviously, just like anywhere, there's 20% of people who aren't. But even my 85-year-old mother, who would who thought it was the end of the world if you smoke weed. When my stepfather was dying a couple of years ago, she said to me, "Oh, maybe you should give him," because I was growing some pot in her greenhouse while I was staying at home, keeping an eye on her while she was keeping an eye on him. And I said, "Now, 10 years earlier, maybe that's okay, but I'm not slipping him anything as he's exiting the world but it was interesting because she suddenly thought, oh, that could be a solution, not a problem. And she's of the generation. Well, she's not of the generation because she's a child of the 60s, but she's as I say, the gin and tonic side of the 60s, not the cannabis side of the 60s.
Right. Yes. Well, yes. My father's drug of choice was definitely the martini.
The martini, exactly. So, look, after college, I mean, did you go? You were doing a lot of business. Did you go and get a job as well, or I mean, how did you
Well,
manage
what happened is my mom became disabled when I was very young. I was still in college, and I felt the call to return home after I went to acting school. I had my own little underground theater company, and we were doing little plays, and I did some independent film in the 90s, and I was keeping that dream alive. But my mom needed a lot of help, and my brother needed help too. And so I went back home to Washington, D.C. We had the hemp company at that point, and so Steve was working the hemp company pretty much full time, and I was working the underground business full time, and that's how we divided
the tasks?
the ecosystem that Steve had built really in DC while I was at college. He had sort of built this structure, but it needed a lot of attention. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. It was a good moment for somebody who had just gone to school and was well organized and well trained and had their shit
About them.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, there and could come in and see the blind spots and see the holes in the operation, and figure out how to, just make it bigger and stronger and faster. And we did all that, and and we were also at the running those two businesses. We were also trying to get medical cannabis on the ballot in Washington, D.C. They have a ballot initiative process in Washington, D.C., where citizens can get laws on the ballot in front of the voters in Washington, D.C. And that's how medical cannabis was legalized in California in 1996 by our friend Dennis Perone. And we were inspired by that. In fact, we were sending Dennis money for that effort. And we wanted to emulate that in Washington, D.C. And like I said earlier, we trying to legalize weed, right? So we could trade and do what we love to do with the plant without being worried of spending long stretches of our lives in prison. I did a lot of work on that initiative effort. I led the team to collect all the signatures and paid everybody, and worked with the LGBTQ nonprofit. They're the ones that actually floated the initiative and were the sort of the public face of it. At that time, it was all about AIDS and helping people with HIV, because there was no drugs, there was no drug cocktails, there's no way to help these folks. They were dying. If you got HIV, you started to write your will, because you're going to die. Cannabis would extend life, and cannabis would make the end of life a lot better for folks, a lot less lonely, especially for folks, because we have our community, we have our cannabis community, we have that trust we were talking about earlier, and so we got that done. The city played all kinds of games with us, and they wouldn't count the votes, and we had to sue them to get them to count the votes, and then they counted the votes, and we won overwhelmingly. But then the feds blocked the implementation. The federal government has jurisdiction over the Washington, D.C. budget, and they put riders.
Look, we haven't got long to go, so I'm going to be getting you back for number two. But
Okay.
that game is playing out again right now as we speak, isn't it? Because Trump said that he doesn't, he's got this idea of Washington, D.C. as the sort of Nuremberg of the US these days, 1,000-year city, and it's going to clean it up and, sweep out. And I noticed that all the illegal places, have been shoved out very quickly. And I noticed these little bits of, that shop broke those rules, or that one did that, So I can see that same story playing out as I follow it at the moment.
If you live in Washington, D.C., you have this sort of weird relationship with the federal government. They assert themselves all the time, and it doesn't feel like you have autonomy. And then there's other times where the feds are just asleep at the wheel, and you can get something like the medical cannabis thing done. They'll block it, and they blocked it for 10 years, I think it was, but eventually it got unblocked when the Democrats had power, and they were able to. And then the local government kind of screwed up the program. But yeah, we can talk about these war stories and different things, and also trying my best to stay in film and theater and storytelling as best I can. But it was a pretty all-consuming mission to not work with Steve with the plant, and also just care for our mom at that time. So that and I'm still in my 20s. I'm still pretty young at this age, and it's still the 1990s here. But that was my first big work as an advocate, was that initiative in Washington, D.C. I really got my hands dirty. When you're in the trenches collecting signatures on the street and paying signature gatherers, and that it doesn't get more grassroots than that. And it's a hard thing to do in a town like Washington, D.C. When you're at a subway station, you go up to somebody and you say, will you sign this initiative to legalize weed? And, you can imagine the reactions you get in a town like Washington, D.C. So, it was a Herculean effort. I think a lot of patients have been helped in DC. Now that law has been implemented and a lot of normalization has occurred in Washington, D.C. They have an adult use law now. Of course, that's been blocked. And the medical law is kind of lame. It's not it doesn't provide as much access as it could. But that's sort of DC for you, right?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, look, I don't need to jump in, but we're almost out of time already.
Okay, let's plug the film real quick. Can we just plug the film
let's
real
come
quick?
back and talk.
Okay, all right.
Let's come back and talk about what happened after that, because I presume it's more about how you're working in the legal business with Steve and
Yes.
how you got to develop your own business and start working on films, and we can talk about that in the next episode.
Live and direct, live and a date no jive.
Legalize it. So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.